Hi, I'm Rachel Abbott, and welcome back to the Standard's Tech and Science Daily podcast. If you're new here, make sure to give us a follow. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, a senior Russian general in charge of nuclear protection forces in Moscow, has been killed by a bomb hidden in an electric scooter. We're joined by the London Standard's defence editor, Robert Fox. Robert, what do we know about this bombing? Ukraine has claimed responsibility.
We know quite a lot about it. We know that it was at an apartment block where the general resided. It was quite an upmarket apartment, only 3 to 4 miles from the Kremlin. And he was coming out, and about 300 grams, so it must have been pretty good, of explosive concealed in the saddle of an e-scooter was triggered remotely and caused a huge hole in the entrance of the apartment block and, of course, killed the general and his assistant. What is so interesting is the sequence of events is that only 24 hours before, officially, Ukraine had accused him of war crimes for using chemical weapons on 4,600 munitions or instances, and within 24 hours they killed him, and within 2 or 3 hours of that, the security service of Ukraine, through sources as it were, let Reuters, Agence France-Presse, the Associated Press numbered, they went to the agencies and said, yes, it was us, because, of course, they're looking for the maximum propaganda impact, particularly on the Russian public.
And who was the general, and what's the significance of him being targeted in this way?
We know quite a lot because he's been very active. And by the way, he's been sanctioned by the UK and sanctioned graphically for using, in quotes, barbaric weapons back only in October. He appeared quite often on television, was known to be a close military associate, in other words, an advisor to Putin himself. And what is not clear is what kind of exotic weaponry he was preparing or prepared to use or training his troops to use, because his title is that he is in charge of the protection force for nuclear, biological and chemical weapons. And this raises a whole load of things about, is Russia going to use the ecological option and blow up or damage or cause a really bad disaster from the nuclear power stations in the crosshairs, in the target lines? Ukraine is running an assassination campaign, quite an effective one within Russia. And this has been going on almost since the main invasion began in February 2022. In the August of that year, there was a prominent bombing again of quite a well-known personality, Daria Dugina, and she was quite clearly not the target. The target was her father, Alexander, who is the great ideologue. He is the great propagandist of the Putin cause. He's an academic, but he appears frequently on television. The bomb was in his car, but he wasn't in it and she was driving.
And there have been reports of mystery blimps on the border of Estonia. What are they?
They look quite a lot of the things that NATO-trained troops in Afghanistan use, the blimps. They're just, like things we saw in air defence of London, you see in the famous black and white grainy pictures of the Battle of Britain. They are blimps, that is, they're tethered balloons. And you can see clearly what's underneath them. And they're very sophisticated cameras, very sophisticated indeed. And the one I've seen over the Estonian forested border is quite clearly pointing deep into Estonia, and that's the problem. And it's a bit of a gimme kind of technique of saying, that everybody knows what they are and what they're doing. And what Russia is saying, I dare you to shoot me down, and then I'll do something nasty in Estonia.
The full interview will be on today's episode of The Standard. Let's go to a very quick break. Coming up in part 2, how Saturn appears to be keeping its famous rings looking youthful. See you back here in just a minute. Welcome back. A study from the Environment Agency shows 6.3 million properties in England are at risk of flooding from rivers, the sea or surface flooding. This report comes after widespread disruption and floods from storms Bert and Dara. The figures are up from 5.5 million from the last assessment made in 2018. The update is based on advanced data modelling, including new mapping and climate change factors. About 4.6 million of the properties are at risk from surface water floods caused by heavy rainfall overwhelming drainage systems. Next, Saturn, which is around 4.5 billion years old, may have a trick to keeping its famous rings looking younger. Research by the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency suggests the rings may be older than previously thought. The agency has now simulated collisions between micrometeoroids, which are small rocky space debris, and icy ring particles using computer models. They found high-speed impacts can lead to vaporization of the micrometeoroids, with the vapor then expanding, cooling, and condensing within Saturn's magnetic field to form charged nanoparticles and ions. They also say this process could potentially also be occurring in the rings of Uranus and Neptune, as well as on icy moons around giant planets. Next, dust levels on the Victoria Line have been found to be the worst on the London Underground, having more than trebled in the last year.
A study which looked at dust levels in drivers' cabs found that average concentrations of respirable dust had increased from 0.13 to 0.43 milligrams per cubic metre. However, this remains below the legal maximum of 4 milligrams per cubic metre.
That's the London Standard's transport editor Ross Lydall. Breathable dust can be linked to fibrosis, scarring of the lung, respiratory problems and cancer.
Transport for London said it spends about £2 million a year taking dust off the tube, cleaning the tunnels and the tracks, and it said that overall, over the last 5 or 6 years, dust levels had been on a sort of decreasing trajectory on the London Underground.
And finally, robo-taxis are coming to Japan. The self-driving cars company Waymo is taking them off US soil for the first time and will begin testing them in Tokyo in early 2025. Titled Road Trips, they're aiming to bring the tech to a host of cities to test different challenges. Now, in Japan, Alphabet-owned Waymo will partner with taxi hailing app Go and taxi company Nihon Kotsu. The Nihon Kotsu employees will learn how to operate Waymo's self-driving Jaguar I-Pace vehicles. And you're up to date. Come back at 4 p.m. for the Standard podcast. Tech and Science Daily returns tomorrow. For all the latest news, head to standard.co.uk.